So I am Dr. Earl Turner. For those that may not know, I'm a psychologist as well as the founder of Therapy for Black Kids. And I'm really excited for this conversation today in recognition of Mental Health Awareness Month. So I have joining me today, Tanisha, who is our Director of Communications for Therapy for Black Kids, and she's going to serve as the moderator. So the fireside chat today, hosted by Therapy for Black Kids, is focused on helping Black youth thrive and live authentic lives. And I'm hoping that this will be a really helpful conversation to talk about some of the challenges that our kids experience, as well as what are some of the ways that we can help them to thrive in the midst of everything that's going on in our society today. So I will turn it over to Tanisha, who is going to get us started.
All right. Hello, everyone. As Dr. Turner said, my name is Tanisha Turner. I'm the Director of Communications for Therapy for Black Kids, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. As a reminder, please keep your microphones muted. Our speakers will be spotlighted during the chat, and those who are interested will have the opportunity at the end of the conversation to unmute if you have a question. Also, if you have a question during the live, feel free to pop it in the chat. For those of you who joined the live event today, or those of you who may watch the recording, welcome to our fireside chat with Dr. Earl on helping Black youth thrive and live authentic lives. As some of you may know, Black kids and teens are at a higher risk of mental health problems due to exposure to community violence, discrimination, and other adverse childhood experiences. Today, I'm looking forward to this chat with Dr. Earl to learn more about how we can help and support our youth. All right, Dr. Turner. So we have some questions for you. Our first question, Dr. Earl, you've been in the field for over 15 years. Tell us what motivated you to create therapy for Black kids?
Yeah, so this is something that's really near and dear to my heart. So I started Therapy for Black Kids in the midst or in the wake of the pandemic. And so, as we all know, that everyone was struggling during that time. But I think as we talked about some of the mental health challenges that were being experienced, that children were in particular being left out of the conversation. And I thought that it was really important to have conversations centered on Black youth in particular, given dealing with pandemic challenges in mental health and coping with racism and discrimination, which we've been dealing with for centuries in this country. And so I really wanted to create a space where we could provide resources on Black mental health, in particular Black youth, as well as provide conversations like this. And during the pandemic, we hosted a lot of virtual events on Instagram in particular, talking about a number of mental health topics, including anxiety, suicide prevention, coping with stress, and coping with racism. And so I really wanted to continue that work as we've been doing the last couple of years. And as I will share later, this has also birthed a book project, which is also available to help raise resilient Black kids in the midst of coping with racial discrimination.
All right. Well, um, tell, so we know many kids are struggling. There have been increasing conversations about youth mental health since the start of the pandemic. What are some ways that kids show stress or mental health difficulties?
I think recognizing how kids express emotions is a really important consideration that we want to recognize, because when kids are stressed, sometimes the way that they deal with situations can show up in terms of them being more irritable. Oftentimes, we will see that kids might become a little bit more clingy, particularly younger children, to their caregivers when they are experiencing stress. And we also know that sometimes kids act out behaviorally. So you may see where kids will exhibit more behavioral difficulties as well. So there are a number of signs that you may see in terms of children experiencing stress. And I think one of the really important things is making sure that if you notice these things, it's not just sort of a one-time thing. So, everybody deserves an off day. And in some of those situations, it could be just a one day type of thing where they're having a bad day. But if you notice that these things are continuing for weeks, that is something that you want to be mindful of, and that is when you want to make sure that you're able to seek out that help from a licensed professional to help you sort of better identify ways to help the child cope.
All right. And that's definitely understandable. And I think those are some good tips for parents and everyone, technology is so different these days. So just don't even give any thought to those Zoom bombers because they just needed something to do. So I have a follow-up question. In your experience, what are things parents should look for to know if they should seek therapy for their child?
Yeah, so I think one of the really important things is understanding like who your child is. And so I think going back to the point that I mentioned about identifying those warning signs, like you know your child, you know how they um, express their emotions, you know their personality. And so if you notice that there are some significant changes in their behavior, personality, or their mood, that may be something that you want to take a note of to make sure that you're able to find, that support for them in those particular situations.
And what can parents do to help promote positive mental health and adjustment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I talk a lot about sort of being proactive. And I think in some situations when it comes to children that we may be a little bit more reactive. So I think trying to create these positive experiences and give them the tools to cope is really important. And so one of the really useful things that I talk a lot about is as a parent, how do you model or show your child how you deal with situations. And so it's
Mhm.
really easy to like tell our kids, this is what you should do. You should count to 10. You should go write in your journal. You should go read a book. But if they're watching us, explode and not maybe manage our emotions the best way, they're probably not going to take our suggestions, to heart as easy unless they see us do those things too. So I think making sure that you're demonstrating for your child, like how do you cope with situations like I talk a lot about traffic for me is one of my biggest pet peeves. And so let's say you're in traffic and you're getting stressed out because you can't get to your destination in the time that you want. Um, and you're getting frustrated. Like it's really important to model for your child and sometimes even like verbalize what you're doing and what you're experiencing so that they understand like, oh, this is why mom or dad is like taking deep breath. And so I think, talking through those situations to say, you know what, I'm having a really bad day today. I'm stressed out and I don't feel the best right now, but I'm going to take a couple of deep breaths, calm down, and everything's going to work out. And so I think being able to do that, go through those motions of actually using the skills of, counting to 10, taking a couple of deep breaths, or whatever is most helpful for you, and then those can be some things that your child might also pick up on. Another thing that you could do is actually be really proactive in like taking time with them to talk about the emotions and feelings so that way they learn to verbalize when things are not going as best for them. So I think a lot of times I talk about how sometimes as children that they don't have that space to talk about their feelings, or when they express their feelings or emotions, we're like, you have nothing to be stressed about, right? And so I think in those situations we want to validate the child's experience to say, hey, yes, I understand you're having a tough time. Can you tell me what is tough for you in this moment or tough for you today, so that they really learn how to verbally express their emotions when they're not feeling their best.
I think that's so good, and I think that's so important. A few things you said. One, to demonstrate, what you want them to do when they are in stress. But then also talking to them about it, like allowing them to see that, you as a parent become stressed as well and show them how you handle it in a positive way. Even when you're stressed, it's okay for them to see that. So I really like that. But it also reminds me of that old saying, practice what you preach. And I think that's definitely something we can use here in these situations. So before we wrap up today and select the winner of our raffle, can you share with us a little bit about your book? What inspired you to create this workbook, and what are some key takeaways parents can expect? And I know that we will have a winner. So let's hear about the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is Raising Resilient Black Kids and really focusing in on how do you help kids cope with racial discrimination. So we know that in the school system that kids experience at least 1 to 5 incidents of racial discrimination on a daily basis. That is a lot of time that our children may encounter those situations, and it may not always be directly them. They might be witnessing some of their peers or classmates go through those experiences as well. And so the book sort of came out through just sort of recognizing the need to give parents some of the tools to really, one, talk about these conversations. I know in the work that I do, a lot of times parents are unsure about, when is it appropriate for me to talk to my child about racism and discrimination? How do I even start that conversation? And so the book is really intended to walk you through understanding, like, what are the ways that you can talk with kids about this in an age appropriate manner, and also how do you take care of yourself. I think we sometimes forget as parents that when we're talking about these experiences, sometimes we might be triggered as well. And so I think it's really important that parents are prepared to engage in those conversations. So what are the tools that you have yourself so that you can be able to manage your own feelings and emotions about that experience? So maybe something happened to you, and so now to talk about this with your child, like, you're getting emotionally reactive as well. And so making sure that you have that time to say, okay, I need to know what are my self-care strategies that I need to do to take care of my own emotions, either to prepare to have this conversation with my child, or once I finish that conversation with them as well. Another really helpful piece of the book is really giving you some of those simple tools and strategies to actually engage in these conversations with your child. So I have some conversation starters in the book. There are a lot of activities that you can engage in to sort of walk through processing experiences with the child. And also several chapters of the book focus on what are some strategies based upon tools that we might use as a therapist or psychologist, focusing on our emotions and our feelings. So making sure that kids understand how to use mindfulness. So if that's something that you want to use with your child, then maybe you want to do that as well, so that way you can be able to support your child. Or there may be other ways that you can think about engaging in activism. So that's something that I've been talking a lot about in terms of how do we ensure that we can talk with our kids about using our voice to actually cause some change in our community. So I think a lot of times it is where we might get in our feelings and feel like, okay, this racism and discrimination is happening. There's nothing that I can do to sort of change that. And so I think it's really important to make sure that you begin to instill in your child that there are things that you can actually do to try to reduce racism in your community, in the school system. And so those are some really important things that the book also talks about as well. And then another thing that I integrated into the book is thinking about, spirituality and how that's sort of helpful as well for our community. I think in particular, for a lot of Black people, religion and spirituality is really important to how they see themselves and how that helps them to be more hopeful about the future. So there are ways that the book also identifies, what are some ways that you could think about using scripture within, a space to help kids feel empowered throughout the book. And then the last piece of the book is really making sure that we can think about how do we recognize if our child needs more than just the workbook. So I hope that the workbook is helpful, but I also realize that sometimes we need more than just a workbook. And so it also talks about ways that you can seek out support or therapy to help your child as well. So that's another sort of takeaway from the book.
All right. So let's transition to the Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. If you want to come on camera to ask your questions, please use the raised hand under the reactions at the bottom of the screen. We will start with the few questions that were submitted in advance. So, Dr. Earl, what should you do when your teenager knows they need help but refuses all help offered to them?
That is a that's a really important question, and I work with teens a lot, and oftentimes they don't want to come to therapy to work with me, and so it is trying to navigate, how to make use of our time when they feel like they're being forced to come to therapy. So I think one of the really helpful things is making sure that you're not using therapy as a punishment. And I know that the question mentioned that um, as the parent, like you recognize that your child needs some help, and they're still feeling like they don't want to go, or it's not something that they can sort of benefit from. And so I would definitely say making sure that you bring it up in sort of a supportive manner to say, seems like there may be some things that you want to talk about, um, or something that might be hard for you right now. And maybe I'm not the person that you want to share that with. Would you be open to talking to somebody else, like a therapist, to help you out? And sometimes that might at least get a foot in the door with the teens. Another way might be to really ask, if they don't want to go to therapy, what do they think they need that might help them? So I think therapy is great. It's a helpful tool. As a psychologist, I know that it can be really beneficial, but I also know that there are many other ways that we can cope and manage our problems. And so sometimes it might be that the team wants to address it in a different way as opposed to therapy. So maybe we can try this other method out first. If that's not successful or helpful as much, then we might want to say, well, our backup or our second option is, if this doesn't work, then you're going to agree that therapy, we're going to at least try it out. And so I would sort of consider that as an option to help the teen out.
All right, good. I like that. Another question we received: how do you support biracial children with Mexican and Black? There is so much racism in the Latino culture.
Yeah, that's a really challenging question. And ironically, I'm here in Los Angeles, and I wasn't aware of the degree of the um, racism that occurs within the Latino culture, particularly towards the Black community. So I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, there's an interesting dynamic that's there. So someone who is belonging to both of those communities, but also trying to sort of decide or understand, like, how do you navigate those experiences where you might be experiencing some discrimination, from Latino individuals, as well as from potentially Black people as well. So I think one of the things I talk about in the book is how do we foster this sense of identity with our children. And so I think it might be helpful to really talk with your child about both aspects of their racial identity, both being Mexican and being Black, and talk about those heritages, talk about the significant contributions of both of those cultures to the child and who they are and how they see themselves. And at least that might give them some sense of understanding, like, yes, I'm dealing with some challenges, but also I understand like who I am, and that it's okay to be who I am. And there's nothing wrong with belonging to both of these cultures. And so that may be something to really think about in terms of like, how do I talk about both aspects of my identity as opposed to try to navigate those experiences of racism coming from both of those communities in particular. We got a lot of questions that came through with registration that obviously there's not enough time to go through all of those, but with the time remaining, wanted to talk about epigenetic trauma. And so the person wanted to know, is epigenetic trauma real? And it actually is real. One of the things that we know from a lot of research is how experiences of trauma impact our brain development. And so it actually changes your brain chemistry when you experience trauma. And so understanding like when your child experiences trauma, when you experience trauma, it could be potentially carried on to the next generation genetically, and put them at a higher risk. So obviously, I think one of the difficulties is we can't say that there isn't a direct sort of causal link between, let's say, if you experience some trauma, that your child is actually going to, have some of those similar responses and reactions that you are having, but it might put them at a higher risk of having some of those traumatic reactions, because of how their biology has also changed. And it even happens to when women are pregnant in utero, those experiences of trauma can also impact the developing child, as well. So really understanding those pieces.
And we have one more question from Tamika. How to encourage kids to not spend so much time on electronics?
Oh, that's a great question. So, less than a minute to answer that. I think really trying to create opportunities for them to do something else. And I think, especially for teens, that one of the ways that they find community is through technology. So, kids are gaming now, they're on Instagram, all of those things that can make it really difficult for them to disengage. And so, try to find ways to foster those social relationships and connections outside of social spaces.